If the unexamined life is not worth living, shouldn't we all be taking some notes? Hello again, everyone. I'm Eli's dad with Project Eli, where we educate, lead, and inspire. And one of the things that people talk about nowadays is journaling, writing stuff down, so on and so forth. I'm not such a huge advocate of having, something that you do every single day, but one of the things that is important to me that I found is jotting things down that create curiosity, that get your mind going, that make you think, so on and so forth. And I have a thing that I do called Talk Thoughts, that I jot down little things that I may use right now. There may be a piece of a puzzle that'll fit into a larger puzzle later. I strongly recommend that you do that because solutions don't come to us in most cases whole. They come to us in bits and pieces. And unless you capture those bits and pieces, it makes things a little more difficult. So, and one of the things that I've received a request or two from some subscribers, like, all right, so what are the things, Eli's dad, that you write down that you put in your Talk Thoughts? What are some things that are worthy? Now, sometimes one of the things you put down is things that happen to you during the day. So you put them down, so it's an experience, so you learn from it, whether they're good or whether they're not so good. Today I want to focus just on some things that I heard, things that I came across, things in the course of life. If opportunity is seldom labeled, you have to be on the lookout for it. So these are some things that I've heard that I'm sure other people have heard as well. But do they write them down? Do they capture them? Are they in a position to use them later on? So let's get started. Some of these are pretty neat, I think. The first one I want to talk about, I thought was really funny, but it makes some good sense. My humility is a big part of my greatness. When you stop and you think about people that are great people, one of the things that comes across, at least for me, that resonates with me, is that they have a quiet confidence and they're humble. And one of the people that has been in the forefront of the news that certainly fits that characterization is Dr. Fauci. He comes across as somebody that's very knowledgeable, yet at the same time, he doesn't come off as being, hey, I'm Mr. Big Shot. He comes across as being like, your grandfather that's smart, that knows things, that sits down with you, that says, sit down, let's have a lifesaver, let's talk, all right? And that is kind of a persona that I would like to embrace. Of course, it's easier for some people to be humble than others, and I'm certainly one of those, all right? So my humility is a big part of my greatness. You can't spin a pandemic. Politicians try and paint a good picture. We have one that's telling us right now, hey, this thing, we're right at the end, we're rounding the corner. Yet at the same time, he's telling us that we're having record numbers of people going into hospitals, record numbers of people dying. People are affected, and the big issue with that is that most people, because it's a small percentage of people, make no mistake about it, but it's still a large number of people. And while it's a small number of people, you may know one or two people that have tested positive, but not everybody knows somebody that not only tested positive, but lost their life to this pandemic. That's happening, unfortunately, more and more and more. But it's the numbers. We're becoming, just like in the example I always give is in Chicago, there are so many drive-by shootings that, like on a weekend, you might have 10 or 12 people that get shot and die, and they make it to page 7 on the newspaper. It's like, we're immune to that. We're immune to those types of things because it happens so often. You can't be that way. You know, I mean, every number, every time somebody dies, there's an actual story behind it. There's sadness behind it. There are people that are affected. And you see these guys come on TV, what I think President Bush, the first one, called them the talking heads. All right, you go on TV and you see the talking heads. And they try and spin everything. They try and spin the pandemic. You can't spin a pandemic. You can't say things are getting better and we're having to close down and we're having to say the hospitals are full. And so some things you just can't spin. A pandemic is one of them. Success leaves clues. And I'm talking from the perspective of, let's say you were the virus. The virus does not recognize borders, yet we do. We're a giant petri dish. I live in an area that's very close to 3 other different states, maybe even 4 other different states. You know, Michigan, Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin. And each of these states has set up their own policy for how they're handling this pandemic. You can't fight, you gotta fight fire with fire. The pandemic does not recognize borders. You know, so you cross from this street to that street, all right, now you're in Indiana, now you're in Illinois, now you're in Indiana, now you're in Chicago. It doesn't work that way. It's like running a relay race at different times with people running different laps. If you want to solve this thing, you have to do it as a unit. The government was set up to make the people in charge closest to the people that it's serving. Now, some things, you know, local government, you talk about schools. You know, state government, they maybe taxes, you know, state taxes. When you're talking about a war, when you're talking about going to war, that's a national thing. That's not a state-by-state thing. That's not a community-by-community thing. Because if you do it that way, because people travel. It's as simple as that. We're living in a giant petri dish here. Especially where I live, we're surrounded by these different states where there's like different policies. You know, one place you can go and sit down and eat, and then a mile away, all you can do is take out, and then 10 miles away from that, they're not even open. There's got to be a uniformity in policy if you're going to solve a huge, big issue. And I think we can safely say that this pandemic, this virus, qualifies as just such an issue. Which kind of leads me to my next one, which is some people are leaders and others just have authority. You know, the first rule of leadership that was taught to me by Mr. Anderson was leaders lead. You don't always have to be in a position, a titled position of leadership to be a leader. You know that you have certain friends and some of them are, you know, say, why don't we go do this? All right, then everybody agrees to do that. And somebody else will say something like that and they go, no, I don't really, you know. There are some people that are leaders, people that you want to follow. And there are some people that just get put in positions of authority and they arbitrarily, you know, say this, they say that. You know what? We're in a time right now where the leaders need to step up. People are starving for leadership. They really are. Leadership is everything. So let's get true leaders in those positions and not people that are just paying lip service to it. There's no such thing as the new normal. There is only the next normal. All right. Now I hear all these different things. I'll be listening to, you know, one of those Sunday morning news shows or a news broadcast occasionally. I don't usually watch the news, but because I'm affected by this pandemic, I want to know what's going on. Normally, you know, I don't watch the news at all because of the negativity involved. But you can't avoid it here, because if you don't know what's going on, you can't take proper actions. But anyway, let's talk about the new normal. There's no such thing as a new normal. Let me explain to you why that is. Back in the day, and I feel I'm one of those old guys. Back when it was my day, all right, when I was out in the field selling, we had a territory, we went to that territory, we knocked on doors, or we went to certain appointments, or so on. And one of the things I remember is my boss said to me, you know what, Eli's dad, you've got to get yourself a pager, so that if something comes up, we can page you. And I fought against getting a pager, and I said, I don't want that. I don't want, to be controlled by something like that. And now look at it. We are going from a society like that, we are now in the phone society. There's really no other way to look at it. People spend so much of their time on their personal phones. The phone is one of the biggest parts of society as we know it today. Years ago, it wasn't. There were different things. TV was bigger back then. Oh, did you see this on TV? And there were only 3 channels, so everybody was seeing the same things. Now, what has the phone done? The phone has with anybody can get on the internet, anybody can make a tweet, anybody can say something, and the minority people now have a larger voice because they can speak unimpeded right on the phone. Now, I'm not sure whether that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing, because sometimes, the minority will say things that are just like, whoa, way out there, and there's always people on the fringes that are looking to belong to something, and they'll choose that particular thing to belong to. So I'm not sure whether that's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. It's a good thing because it gives more people a voice. But, when I take a look at the big picture, I'm confused by it. I'm confused. Is this a good thing? But the point is, the other thing is, people are meant to converse. People are meant to talk with each other, not necessarily right now, this minute, when we have social distancing. But given a scenario where that's somewhat normal, where people can communicate, can sit down in a restaurant and talk, or go to a group, or go to a football game, or something like that, people were made to converse with each other. And before this thing hit, people can be right next to each other, and all they're doing is they're looking into their phones. And I have to wonder if that's A, healthy thing, and B, that's gonna pass also. That's a big part of our society today. 20 years from now, I'd be willing to bet a significant amount of money that there'll be something else that will take its place, just as the computer was dominant and is dominant. Took over, and then we advanced from the computer to the phone, because the phone now has a computer. Different technologies make things more important or less important. But once again, the key thing to remember is, while technology changes, principles and philosophies remain the same. People still want the same things. Just because, in the old days you would meet somebody maybe in church, you would meet somebody in school, you would meet somebody on the job, you would go to a bar and meet somebody, you go to a dance and meet somebody. Now people get in line. They're still looking for the same thing. They're still looking for love. So the technology changes, but the principle and the philosophies remain the same. The politics of the impoverished is food. That's especially true right now. There are so many people that are hurting right now in terms of literally just putting food on the table for their next meal. And you got all these politicians, talking about, let's not do the thing with the statues, and, all these different things that people get distracted about. Do you think somebody that is struggling for their next meal honestly really cares who the next president's going to be? They can't. They got to focus on, I got to feed my family. I got to put food on the table. Why can't the politician, and this is a huge thing. I mean, this isn't, you know, a small segment of society. This is a large segment of society. People have, you know, been hurt by this pandemic. They've lost their jobs. They've lost their livelihood. They've lost their income. And for how long has it been? I mean, we had that first thing where they sent everybody $1,200, you know, and helped out small businesses and so on. These things are about ready to expire. You know, I'm making this video on, what's this, the 8th day of December right now. The point is, these things are right in front of us. What are they waiting for? These people are here to represent us. Leaders are there to serve, not to be served. So one of the things their constituents have got to be saying to them, I mean, you take a look at the lines of people lining up to get food in this country. The government is there to help us. Are they helping us? Are the politicians helping us? You know, usually politicians are pretty well-to-do. They don't have to worry so much about, you know, money coming in. But their constituents do. The politics of the impoverished is food. Then I heard another expression, anger and theater. People get angry and then they gotta put on a show to show, and I'm not sure whether that's a good or a bad thing. I mean, you know, you need to demonstrate. As an example, the Black Lives Matter movement, to me, is a great movement, and it's not something that's, you know, a recent concept, but the activities of the people in that movement are getting attention. So there needs to be anger and theater to bring it to the attention of the general populace. Does that make sense? Anybody can see adversity. It takes a strong person to see opportunity. You know, anybody can sit there and say, oh, that's not good, you know, why are we doing that? But every time there's something like that, there's an opportunity to fix it, to correct it, to make it better, to make it easier. Yet people would rather just focus on the adversity. And that's the difference between the people that make it and the people that don't make it, is the ones that do are able to envision something better. They take a look at a situation as it is. Not better than it is, not worse than it is, but as it is. And then in their minds they visualize something that is better than the current scenario. And it's not always logical. And I'm going to talk about that's one I have coming up. That's a great one. It's not always logical, but the steps you have to take have to be logical. And the key thing is when you first of all have to have that vision of improvement, and secondly, you have to be able to get to a starting line, and you get to a starting line that gets you moving in the right direction, and you're going to run into a roadblock, and it's going to, you know, be a barrier for you. But once you get moving, it's easier to see the next starting line. So that's where we're going to stop today. Anybody can see adversity, but it takes a strong person to see opportunity. And because we never end a meeting on a philosophical note, get out there and charge! I'm Eli's dad.